y'all kept a girl waiting. Let's try this.
忍びの掟は忘れまいな。親の次に大事なもの、お前の心に刻むがよい。あれが今日からお前の主だ。命を賭して守る。たとえ奪われるとも必ず取り戻すのだ。よいな、狼よ。
I never would have thought that a company like From Software could get so much hype from a single, nondescript teaser trailer. Famous for the Souls series, From Software is at it again with their next big game, Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. Published by Activision for whatever reason, Sekiro forgoes the action RPG for the action-adventure and forgoing dark fantasy for a fictional version of the Sengoku period Japan. Upon first reveal, everyone thought the trailer was hinting at Bloodborne 2, seeing as it had similar markings on the wall, but it was indeed not this. When fully revealed, it was often compared to the Tenchu series, a series of ninja stealth games that made it all the way to the Wii before passing on. Funnily enough, this is actually a franchise that FromSoft was involved with before, having publishing rights in Japan for a majority of the games, and even developing a puzzle action game in the series themselves. Of course, Sekiro turned out not to be this, so I guess the Tenchu series only got to die once. This is From's first deviation from their tried and true formula in a long while, something developers like this tend to avoid as it can be so risky for them. Of course, after 5 Souls games, it makes sense for the company to want to move on. But have they truly moved on? Is Sekiro still a Souls game? Yes, but let's get to the review proper, shall we? As mentioned before, Sekiro is set in a fictionalized Sengoku period, making this one Weeb Souls, despite being made in Japan. In Sekiro, you play as an unnamed shinobi that is only referred to as Wolf, or Sekiro by some people. Sekiro was orphaned in a great battle staged by Ishin Ashina in order to conquer the lands of Ashinam for himself. Our little wolf was found by the big, burly shinobi Ukonzaemon Usui, known as Owl so we don't have to commit a language crime just to address the fellow like I probably just did. He decided to train our wolf in the art of the shinobi and, 2 decades later, it's time for him to use this deadly art form in defense of his master, Lord Kuro, the divine heir. Set 2 decades after the wolf was adopted by the owl, the lands of Ashina are falling apart as Lord Ishin is sick and dying, causing the Interior Ministry to make its move to unify Japan. Now, what stake does our wolf have in this? Well, Lord Kuro being the divine heir makes him the carrier of the dragon's heritage, granting him, and anyone who shares his blood, immortality. I don't know about you, but if immortality is involved and it's transferable via something like blood, you can damn well bet that some asshole out there is going to want it, and that's exactly what happens here. Our wolf gets roughed up, tossed in a well, Sadako style, and left for dead as the baddies make off with our little lord. Of course, it wouldn't be a game if we died so soon. Well, other than Murdered Soul Suspect or Dark Souls. Sekiro struggles to his feet, unsure of why he's alive, and sneaks his way to the tower Lord Kuro was stuffed into. There, Kuro returns him his sword, and now he's free to wreak havoc on the poor evil dudes who did this to him. Until he gets his ass handed to him by the badass Genichiro Ashina, Ishin's adopted grandson. Not only does he pass him his ass in the most definitive of fashions, in Dark Souls and Demon Souls style, he also delivers him a gift that you would normally never see coming. His own arm flopping to the ground before him. Yes, this badass samurai man decides to divorce Sekiro from his left arm in pieces with Princess Peach, leaving Sekiro for dead. Again. Maybe shadows really do die twice. Of course, this isn't the end of our bloody, brooding hero, as he wakes up again unsure of what happened. Turns out, he's also got the dragon heritage flowing through his veins, granting him the status of undying. Not only that, he wakes up with some crazy, funky prosthetic arm, the prosthetic we saw in the teaser trailer, and in the presence of an emaciated sculptor. The sculptor reveals the purpose of the prosthetic and the goings-on since he was owned so handedly. Turns out, Kuro is in Ashina Castle, meaning it's up to our undying ninja to find his way there in order to save his charge. All of this to say, while this is still from Software, meaning it's light in storytelling as a whole, it's massively more of a story than any of the Souls games before it. Now, most of the nitty-gritty is still left to optional dialogue, item descriptions, and Sekiro's ability to eavesdrop on enemies and NPCs. Surprisingly, the story is very interesting and it's actually engaging. The mystery of what's actually going on is just as addicting to figure out as it usually is in a Souls game. It's not going to win any awards, as there are very few cutscenes, mostly playing out in in-game dialogue, but it's a more gripping step up from their prior games. Let's get this out of the way first. Now, I know I've said it wasn't a Souls game only to call it a Souls game, so what the hell is it? Well, to me, it's a Souls game. It is still structured like a Souls game is. You explore an interconnected world looking for items, bonfires, known as Sculptor's Idols here, NPCs, enemies to kill, and bosses to fight. The handling of the game also feels like a Souls game where basic combat is concerned. The R3 button still locks on, the R1 button still attacks, the L1 button still blocks, and the circle button is still used for dodging. The flow of the combat is fairly similar, only you aren't aiming to deplete your opponent's life. Instead, you are aiming to break the enemy's posture, basically breaking their guard, replacing stamina. Striking the opponent will do damage to their health all the same, but it also raises their posture gauge at the same time, with more HP damage causing the posture gauge to recover slower. You can also swing all day long without a stamina bar to hold your rage back. When the gauge is full, a death blow can be performed with the press of the R1 button, killing them instantly. Now, other than the posture thing, it's not exactly the same as Souls, seeing as there are no heavy attacks. Instead, the R2 button uses a shinobi tool that you have installed in the prosthetic, each with different functions and uses while consuming spirit emblems, strange floating objects you find in the environment or from killing enemies. You can also equip up to 3 at once and can swap between them in-game with the triangle button. Cross also doesn't interact anymore, seeing as the cross button is for jumping, adding a whole new layer to the Souls formula, verticality. To aid in this new era of vertical Souls, the L2 button is reserved for a grappling hook, letting you anchor onto designated spots in order to traverse the environment in style. This can make areas way more interesting, and some larger enemies and bosses let you use it in combat, though not enough of them do in my opinion. With the cross button jumping, that means that the square button is left to handle the interacting and the D-pad handles your items, both swapping between them and using them. The final basic combat system that is different is parrying. As you can tell, the L2 button no longer parries, seeing as your grappling hook is installed there, meaning parrying is handled differently. Here you press the L1 button to block at the right time, and instead of parrying, you'll deflect the enemy's attack, causing greater posture damage. Against your jobber enemies, this is deadly as they'll fall to a couple deflects, though they do find themselves getting stronger as the game progresses, as they tend to do, the bastards. Of course, it can't always be that simple, as enemies will quickly get the ability to rapidly attack. What this means is you'll have to deflect multiple attacks in a row, which can lead to big posture damage. Not only that, but enemies can also switch up their patterns depending on whether they were deflected or not. They also have a few special, unblockable attacks in their arsenal. Thankfully, due to these typically breaking the rules of the game, they are telegraphed by a red symbol appearing above Sekiro's head. These attacks come in 3 forms: sweeps, thrusts, and throws, each with a different way of optimally handling them. Sweeps ask for you to Goomba stomp on the enemy's head, pressing the X button in the air like you would a wall jump, and thrusts ask for a perfectly timed deflect, or, if you purchase a skill, a Makiri counter. The Makiri counter is performed when dodging into the thrust, which can take some getting used to, as we're kinda wired to avoid the pointy end of an enemy's attack, not walk into it. As for throws, the only answer to them is to get out of the way, sadly, and you do want to get the hell out of dodge when these are performed, as they deal heavy big boy damage. To keep all this fair to the challenge of the game, seeing as they're telegraphed to you and all, which type of unblockable attack isn't told to you until you see the animation, meaning you'll still have to study what action is best, meaning it's good to give social distancing a good practice before going too hard on a new enemy. And don't think you're safe from this. The posture system works on Sekiro as well, with your own posture gauge filling up at the bottom of the screen as you get deflected or block attacks. If your posture breaks, you'll leave yourself open to a very strongly worded love tap, and this is the kind of love a shinobi has no need for. Thankfully, the enemy can't typically death blow you, and I said typically as some enemies and bosses do have their own equivalent, so a broken posture isn't quite the same as a broken heart. Enemies can also smack you hard enough to cause you to lose your footing. In this instance, you'll fall to the ground, opening yourself up to all sorts of things. But if you block in time, Sekiro will regain his footing and go back to defending himself. Sadly, you don't change equipment at all in this game, so you're stuck with the same trusty katana, which might sound dull, but the game is built around it, so it works. Despite it all being a system, meaning like all Souls games, all the enemies behave in a certain way, this new posture system keeps the combat frantic and exciting all the way through. Another big change is the addition of stealth, as Sekiro would be the worst ninja since our orange Fortnite friend without it. In fact, I think Sekiro is still the worst ninja around with it. You can now crouch with the L3 button and use line of sight in tall grass to hide from enemies, which is indicated by black shadows on the corners of your screen. When being spotted, an all too commonly seen in AAA gaming alert gauge starts filling up above the spotter's head, giving you time to bamf away. It starts as a white outline and slowly fills up to yellow. When the gauge is yellow, the enemy is alerted and begins searching. When out in the open, when it's yellow, it quickly fills to red, meaning you are now engaged. You may now touch swords. Of course, you can lose enemies, but it isn't natural or easy. Like games such as Assassin's Creed, enemies will toss shit at you if you hang out just out of reach, meaning you need to not only get away, but you also need to get out of sight. Now, this isn't always hard, as Sekiro moves like Sonic the Hedgehog when he sprints. You can zip and zoom around the environment when sprinting, and with no stamina bar to get in your way, you can do it all damn day if you wanted. In previous Souls game, I swear they loved dragons so much because the dev were dragons with how much you needed to be one in order to sprint and look around at the same time. This is done via a technique known as the claw or dragon claw, where you move the middle finger on your right hand to the R1 button as your index finger then goes to hold the circle button, leaving your thumb on the right stick. It was primarily popularized in Monster Hunter on the PSP, I believe, but it made its way into Souls as well thanks to the sprint button being the circle button. In the prior Souls games, it felt like you were just fixing a problem the developers didn't realize was a thing, somehow. But now, with Sekiro, I'm starting to believe that this was the actual method they intended. The reason I think this is because a lot of Sekiro seems made for this. Zipping and zooming about doesn't seem like a player-made decision to avoid things. It seems like an actual way of tackling some zones, especially later on. Now, for someone so skilled in the Dragon Claw as I, thanks to 13 years of experience with the series, it is a bizarre thing to seemingly design such a difficult game around. With our talk of dragons and their claws out of the way, back to stealth and ninjas. As mentioned before, you have a grappling hook now, and this lets you get around vertically, which can also mean getting above your enemies. Here in Sekiro, the death blow isn't only limited to breaking posture, it is also used from stealth as well, meaning being behind or above an unaware enemy is a death sentence for the poor fool. Yes, stealth is valued here, as it can lessen the tide of enemies that gang up on you if you can tackle some without getting caught. Of course, unlike most stealth games, there's no way of silently doing these kills. No, stealth is only stealthy once, which, while annoying, makes a lot of sense seeing as I always wondered why no one could hear their friend dying right beside them. Calling these stealth kills is kind of insulting the actual stealth kills, as I don't classify turning your enemies into fountains of blood as being stealthy. As just mentioned, enemies will hear you stealth blowing their friends, naughty, and will come to investigate it close enough. Now, jumping down and air blowing enemies to death, well, that's like using a shotgun and calling it stealthy. It's like dressing in neon pink, having an RGB sword, and screaming, "Death blow!" all anime style as you attack. Everyone and their neighbors will know you are there. Of course, you can catch the stupid enemies off guard from the front as well if you can make it to them before you alert them, letting you combine the 3 openers and giving you plenty of versatility in tackling situations. It's not good stealth, but it is versatile and flashy, so it's fine. Like the Souls games, you get experience when you kill enemies, but unlike Souls games, money is also a separate currency that enemies also drop, something you pick up by holding the square button. Money and experience are used for what they sound like they would be used for. Money, known as sen here, is used to buy items from the various merchants you find around Ashina, and they can sell some useful stuff. One of the interesting things they sell are money pouches, much like the pouches you find in the world, and like the soul items you find in the Souls games. These are useful to buy because, like Earthbound and Pokemon oddly enough, you lose half your money when you die. Putting your sen into these coin pouches can mitigate this as they cost the same amount as they're worth, effectively being a makeshift bank system. Now, hang on a minute, I hear you say. You said there are experience points, but you also said this isn't an RPG. Now, I know what you're thinking, but it really isn't the same as a level or anything, as the experience builds up to a skill point. You can put those skill points into one of 3 skill trees, giving you a new ability or a passive buff. Now, these skills are nothing too exciting. A lot are different combat arts which you perform by holding L1 and pressing R1, but you can only have one equipped at a time, meaning you'll find one you like and only use it. Of course, it's still worth putting skill points in as the passive buffs are useful, which include more health recovered from your gourd and the ability to hold more spirit emblems. Of course, death causes you to lose half your accrued experience points, like your sen, but also like sen, it won't touch your solid skill points, meaning gaining a skill point is permanent progress. In the end, skill points stop meaning things quickly after getting the Makiri counter and the Whirlwind Slash, but it is always good to put the points in. On the sen side of things, sen is more particular, and I found it more useful for the limited one-time items being sold by the merchants, mostly known as memorial mobs, rather than the consumables. Of course, this is a Souls game, so it's going to be bone-crushingly difficult. Ball-bustingly difficult, even. Enemies hit hard, even more so than in the Souls games, I want to say, and you are one small ninja against many, many foes. These enemies will gang up on you. Spit roasts are not out of the question as they brutally assault you all at the same time. The game on its own is difficult, especially as it adopts the Dark Souls 2 style of Estus system, where you start with only one healing gourd and work your way up with only small regen items to fill the gaps, but the fact that enemies will attack you simultaneously can make some situations quite hairy. You never know just how screwed you are until there are 4 enemies bombarding your puny posture bar with their big, strong attacks and leaving you totally vulnerable while they fertilize the floor with your sweet red blood. Now that I got that creepiness out of my system, death here carries 2 punishments, the first being a loss of resources, which I went over already. The big punishment, one that I'm not quite sure how much I agree with, is something called Dragon Rot. If Sekiro bites the proverbial dust too many times, there's a chance that one or more NPCs in the world will be inflicted with the plague known as Dragon Rot. Now what does Dragon Rot do exactly? Well, it lowers the chance of you receiving unseen aid, which prevents any loss of experience points or sen upon death. It also does something more dire than that, preventing the NPCs from furthering their quests. Yes, you heard me right. Dying in a Souls game can cause you to miss out on content, which would be the most grievous of sins to commit upon the player base, but you can cure it. Using a dragon's blood droplet at a sculptor's idol after a certain point in the game will cure the plagued NPCs, though be warned that items are rarely found in the environment and mobs only sell one at a time, with its price increasing with each purchase. This Dragon Rot system has caused me to become paralyzed to playing the game for so long, and honestly, it's stupid that it did. It doesn't hinder things as much as the game would have you think, and it can be cured quite easily. It also seems to get more and more lenient with doling out the sickness, as I found it happening less and less. And that is not because I died less and less. While the actual zones become easier the more you play and adapt to the combat, the bosses themselves still remain a boot to the face, and not the boot of a lovely shrine maiden, more like the boot of a big samurai warlord, which brings us to the bosses. Sekiro's bosses are the oddest of the entire pseudo-franchise actually. Not only because of how Sekiro's combat changes the flow of battle, causing you to be both aggressive and defensively aggressive at the same time, but also because of how bosses are handled in-game. A boss in Sekiro is determined by their life bar, which is odd to say, but a boss's life bar will have at least one red circle above the top left of the bar. This indicates how many life bars they have, but a single red circle just indicates that they need to be death-blowed for the boss to actually die. This fast and loose system lets them place bosses where you wouldn't expect, as they can be among the rabble. Like other Souls games, bosses don't respawn and they drop a reward for killing them. In this case, it tends to be prayer beads. Prayer beads act as heart pieces from Zelda, where collecting 4 will let you offer them to a sculptor's idol in order to increase your life and posture bars. Collecting these is absolutely helpful as you progress in the game, obviously, but you don't need to at all, as a lot of the bosses are completely optional. You'll know when you reach a storyline boss, as their life bar will appear before you even aggro them, and they might be accompanied by a cutscene. The smaller bosses may be optional, but they still put up a hell of a fight, just like your average story boss fight, and are quite varied. Sure, the mini-bosses are where you see the least variety, as there are quite a few in the game, but they offer a nice challenge and are a great way of showing progress through a zone. As for the main bosses, these are obviously where the bulk of the challenge comes from in the game, as they are insane at times. These guys don't play by the rules and often refuse to even acknowledge your deflections, with only their posture bar giving you the slightest bit of attention. Here, a mix of old and new comes into play, which keeps things fresh from the rest of the game. In boss fights, you are going to want to deal both HP and posture damage to make sure these living walls finally get torn down, as their posture recovers way too quickly with their health full. They'll often fully recover from your onslaught while they press the attack on you, meaning you'll need to switch your tactics up in order to take them down. Defeating a main boss earns you a memory instead of prayer beads, boosting your attack at the sculptor's idol. And, just gotta throw it out there, the boss for the good ending of the game is probably the hardest in the series. It really puts your skills to the test, and it will fill you with so much adrenaline when it's defeated that you may just pass out. Sekiro may be different from its brethren at first glance, but the adrenaline you get from clearing a zone, making it to the next sculptor's idol, or defeating the boss that's been your life's problems for the last 5 hours is undeniably Souls. The switch up of the combat system, like Bloodborne before it, keeps things fast and fresh, paving the way for the exciting hardships to come. To be honest, this was probably the most thrilling game to conquer, as it was so different and raw. There are no stats or better weapons to guide you through here. You just have to get good the majority of the time. The Souls games have never been ones to win any awards at the Sexiest Game Awards, but they usually come first in the "but they've got a great personality" polls. Now, that might sound like an insult to them, and I would like to say that it isn't, as the games have always looked good, but quite rough around the edges. Things such as frame rate, hitching, and enemies running at like 7 frames a second when far away are common in the series, as well as stone-dead faces when people talk. Surprisingly, they are all fixed here, at least running on the PlayStation 5. The game ran flawlessly for me, with just the tiniest of weird flaws, like bodies falling out of nowhere when returning to a place I've been, or turning the camera too fast. This is also the best looking game From has ever made at the time of release, and it actually has lip movement with dialogue. The combination of 17th century Japan and Japanese folklore makes for an incredible looking art style, with some truly odd beings for you to fight along with your everyday samurai and bandits. The environments are beautiful, ranging from snow-covered castle areas to a strange village hidden in a valley. The areas do get a little samey looking sometimes, but with how rare this setting tends to be in video games, I never really noticed this without having to think hard on it. The enemies are mostly just dudes in fancy Japanese armor, but the ones that aren't are fantastically designed, hitting that old Japanese style perfectly, but also looking slightly off, such as being old, withered, and almost rotten. One other thing that looks amazing, but is kinda limited, are the death blows themselves. When an enemy's health or posture is depleted, you can perform a death blow on them, kinda like glory kills in Doom, giving you a breather from the action while a lavish animation plays out. But I already mostly explained all this. The animation is stellar, and there are plenty of different animations, but the limitation comes in how few per enemy type there are. Sure, you can't expect them to have like 100 different death blows, but a few more on the enemies you fight more often, like the regular-sized humans, would have been nice. Regardless, they are satisfying as all hell, making Bloodborne's visceral attacks and the Souls series' backstabs look like a light tap. The arterial spray would look well at home in Bloodborne, and the sound effect accompanying it makes all the combat worth it in the end. On the audio side, the music is excellent and obviously Japanese styled. It's a beautiful change from the rousing choir of the Souls series. There are two big changes on the audio side, however, and both are excellent changes. The first is the option to play the game in Japanese, which I did to appease my weeb self, and the second is that there is more music in general. There is actually a track that plays during your everyday combat, making it more JRPG-like, I guess, and the Japanese voice work, along with the new music, makes the game feel a lot better. Souls have always been strong on the sound side of things, so it isn't entirely surprising, but good work should always be commended. Now, it might come as a surprise, but the game isn't perfect. The game starts out quite brutally for an entirely new combat system, and stealth stops really being a thing as you progress in the game without forcing it. Also, some areas are unfairly designed. No spoilers, but there's an area late in the game with 3 or 4 boss level enemies all stationed together, making it an unwise area to fight through, but there's also no option to stealth through either, making it a case of gotta go fast and bolt past them. The enemy variety itself is also on the lower end overall, not a big problem as the combat system was made for them, but it's a little disappointing. The biggest issue I had with the game personally is the level design. Now, don't get me wrong, the level design is excellent and the verticality to the game did lead to some new possibilities in game flow, but it also made things a lot more confusing. Finding all the items has never been so difficult, and just finding your way through can sometimes be a little challenging. Now, you tend to have a goal in mind usually, but pathways spread every which way without much guidance, leaving you to meander into entire zones that weren't even on your docket to visit today. Some people like this kind of thing. Me personally, I would rather it be a tiny bit more guided, as nothing gets me more than leaving things undone and doing things out of order. Even Dark Souls is more guided than this, though this is a your mileage may vary kind of thing. Thankfully, they decided to tackle one of the bigger issues with the prior games here. The one more try mentality, I'll call it. Normally, when playing a tough game, constant losses causes frustration to build and you want to get right back at it in order to practice on what's stumping you. If a boss or stage or whatever has multiple phases, a death usually sends you back to the start, which can compound your frustration, especially when practice against the later phase is what you really need. Now, that is still a thing here, but it's been mitigated a bit thanks to Sekiro's ability to revive himself, indicated by the death blow pips above your health. Now you get 1 by default, but you can also get up to 2 extra lives that are filled by killing enemies. Now this might sound like it makes things too easy, but you'd be wrong of thinking that, as typically you only get 1 life. After reviving once, you need to kill a number of enemies before you can use another life, effectively making these do-overs for the tough parts. The good thing is, deathblowing a boss will make these available again, giving you another life for the next phase should you need it. This is a great compromise for removing the multiplayer while keeping the challenge of the game high. Something we can all agree needs to stop, however, is how From has been handling endings ever since Bloodborne. Getting Bloodborne's true ending is a test in patience to be sure, and Dark Souls 3 kicked things up a notch, BAM! But Sekiro's ending requirements are most bananas of the bunch. Thankfully, I personally feel experiencing something is different than reading about something, so, helped by people being respectful with guides, I didn't feel bad about looking up the ending requirements. I still had to do it myself after all. Now, I like the idea of them having at least one bananas ending, but even the regular ending can be tricky to get here. Of course, the bad ending is easy enough, just a simple dialogue choice, but still, it's all rather silly. Sekiro's another notch in From Software's cap, which is starting to look a tad ratty at this point in the game. It's another take on their established Souls formula, much like Bloodborne was, just shoved into a more story-driven experience, and it works wonders. The art direction matched with the strong sound design and impactful and fluid combat makes this a solid choice if you're down for more Souls. Of course, you should understand before going in that this is quite difficult, and there's nothing here to make that experience easier, especially considering I feel this is the hardest in the series. Gone is the multiplayer and stats, you just gotta get good. Getting good is worth it, however, as this is one of the most satisfying games I've ever played. The Wolf's journey may not be perfect, but the good old owl is going to give his shinobi son a glorious 9 out of 10. I don't understand how FromSoft can keep going at this rate, but their return to ninjadom is not going to be the thing to stop their streak.